Simple interest or earnings paid on a fixed amount of money. So your principal amount. So that's the amount of money you borrow. Okay. So if I borrow $500 from Kason, but he's going to charge me interest, my principal amount is that $500. Okay. To calculate simple interest, use the formula I equals PRT. Okay. This is the important formula. So big I stands for the interest earned. So that's just going to give me how much money extra I have to pay back. So if I borrow $500 from Kason, okay, he's going to charge me whatever interest rate he's going to charge me. And then I'm going to multiply it by how long it takes me to pay him back. And then that money is going to be the interest that he earns. So in the end, he's going to get $575. Does that make sense? So he would get his amount of money that he let me borrow plus the interest that we paid, okay? So R is the interest rate, okay? It is a percentage. To go into the formula, it must be in decimal form. Do you understand? It has to be in decimal form. Remember what Mr. Brooks talked about the little percentages. They're pretty, but they have to be in decimal form to be multiplied, okay? T is time in years. If it talks about months, it needs to be a fraction or a decimal version. It has to be time in years. So if it says like 6 months, well, instead of putting 6 there, I'm going to need to put 0.5 because that's half of a year. Does that make sense? Are you with me? Compound interest earnings are calculated on the original amount plus accumulated interest. So like if you do compound interest, you do it for a year, and then you take your total with your interest, and then that goes in and you earn interest on your interest, kind of. Okay? We're going to get into that a little bit clearer here in a minute. To calculate compound interest that is compounded or added annually, use the simple interest formula for each single year, but add the interest to obtain the new starting balance. We'll get there. Okay? So, for example, Nelson deposits $1,200 into an account that earns 5% simple interest. Calculate the interest. So right here, here's our formula. Do we see it? Okay. Y'all see it on your page. So we have our principal amount, which was the $1,200. Do we need all these decimals? Probably not. Okay. Rate, 5%. They put it as a decimal, 0.05. You good with that? And then how many years? He said 2 years. So there's my 2. So it's principal times rate times time. And it's always in years. Principal times rate times time. So we would just take these numbers and multiply them together. So we would say, I would start with 0.05 times 2 because that's an easy multiplication, right? 0.05 times 2. It's going to give me 0.10, and then I'm going to take 1,200 and multiply by 0.1. And so my interest is going to be 120. So if I borrow $1,200 at 5% interest for 2 years, my interest is going to be 120. So how much would I pay back as a total value of that loan? Nobody? Okay, so think about this. I said how much, if I originally borrowed $1,200, or Nelson did, and then he got it for 5% interest for 2 years, and he paid $120 in interest. So how much would he pay back at the end of those 2 years? How about 1,200 plus 120? So he would end up paying $1,320 for the amount he borrowed, which was $1,200. Does that make sense? Because you're going to pay your interest plus your principal amount back. Do you understand that concept? Is that above, or is that okay? Okay. You're like, woo. For a second there, I was worried. Okay. So that's kind of how simple interest works. You set it up, you multiply it straight across, and then solve it. It's pretty simple. Okay, so now this one is a little bit harder. Nina deposits $1,200 into an account. She earns 5% compound interest. It's compounded annually each year. Calculate the interest she earns in 2 years. Okay, so I want you to watch this process. It's on your paper, and I left it there so you can kind of see it. So starting balance was $1,200. So same thing. They multiplied it by the interest rate, which was 5%, and then times 1 year, because this is compounded annually. So you got $60 interest, okay? They took this number and added it with this number, and then it becomes your new original amount with compounded, okay? So then you do 1260 times 0.5 times 1, and you get this number, okay? So it's you're earning interest on the interest. Does that make sense? If something's compounded annually, you're earning interest on your interest. So mortgage, I think, are compounded annually. The way they're set up, mortgages are ugly. They earn
more in interest than you do for your house.
Yeah, you pay way more in interest than you do for your house. It's crazy. But this they're making interest on the interest. So if you're asked simple or compound interest, generally the choice is going to be simple interest. You want to be simple interest. But if you're don't have an option, like with mortgages, it's sometimes hard. So let's try this one right here. It says compare the simple interest and the compound interest compounded annually on a deposit of $1,800 that earns 5% for 2 years. Okay, so let's do the compound interest. So compound would be $1,800 times 5%, 0.05 times 1 year, because we're doing it for 2 rounds, right? So 1,800 times 0.05. Okay, so I'm getting that he earned $90 for that first year, okay? So we would take this number and add it back to your original, and it would be $1,890. So that's the amount we would start for the second year on compounded annually.
Is that a dollar sign or
a dollar sign. Okay, so now we would do 1,890 times 0.05 times 1. Why didn't I multiply it by 1 at the end? Did it change anything?
No.
It's not going to change anything, yeah. So we're going to say 1,890 times 0.05. And so the second year, they made $94.50. Yep. So total value of compounded interest. But this is just asking for the total value of the compounded interest. If it's just asking for interest, we would say $184.50. Okay? That's how much interest he earned. Now, if we did that simple interest formula, we would say 1,800 times 0.05 times 2. Okay? Because remember, we did 2 years and they asked us to compare. So we would say, we already did that 0.05, so that's 90. 90 times 2 is 180. So simple interest would be $180. So which way are you going to earn more interest? Compounded. Does that make sense? But if you're wanting to pay back, then you want a simple interest. Okay? So you would earn $180 with simple interest and $184.50 with compound interest. There is a different formula that they teach you in 8th grade, but this is how they...
What was the formula for the compound? I missed that part.
They don't... You do the simple interest formula, and
Oh, and then
since they don't have a calculator. Since they don't have a calculator, they do it this way in 7th grade. In 8th grade, they have a formula that's on your formula chart that they use. Does that make sense? But since we don't have a calculator, it's easier to do this way. Okay, so how do you feel about this so far? Pretty simple, right? Just some multiplication with some decimal. Okay, so look at number 2. What is the amount of simple interest? Okay, so we already did that. We said 180. That's from the question before. Okay. Compare the simple interest and compound interest compounded annually on a deposit of $3,000 that earns 6%, okay, for 2 years. So let's do the compound. You ready? So my principal is $3,000.
Ms. Hopkins, would you please post your
Yes. Okay, so $3,000 times 0.06 times 1, because we're compounding annually. Okay, so compounding annually. Oh, grab another one. They're right there. Okay. 3,000 times 0.06. Ooh, what happened? Hold on just a second. So I got 180 right here. Did none of them have it back? Oh, that may be the homework page. We have 180, so we take that and add it back into our starting balance, because the next year, that's the first year. The second year is gonna start right here. Okay, so it starts right at 3,180, and then it keeps going. Okay, so 3,180 times 0.06 times 1. Okay, so when it says total value of compound interest, the total value of compound interest is the 180 plus the 190.80. 370.80. Perfect. Okay. 370.80. Now we're just going to calculate the simple interest. So what would be the formula? Somebody tell me the formula for that. 3,000 times what?
0.06
Times what?
1.
How many years is it?
2.
2. So we're going to put 2 there. So 3,000 times 0.06 is 180. 180 times 2 is 360. So for simple interest, it would be $360. Okay? How do y'all feel about that so far? Pretty simple, right? Okay, so I'm going to have you try number 3. I want you to calculate, sorry, it's not letting me move it for some reason. I want you to calculate the simple interest and the compound interest for number 3. I want you to write, it's $3,000 or $5,000, excuse me, for 7% interest for 2 years. Okay, so go through and do that and calculate both, and we're going to discuss it here in just a minute.